The scene was deceptively calm. Sunlight over the White House rose garden, cameras rolling, and the President of the United States making a statement that had no precedent in modern diplomacy. He looked straight into the lens and demanded that a sovereign allied nation hand over effective control of its major ports. This was not about adjusting a tariff schedule or renegotiating a trade clause. This was a public, unscripted demand that Canada surrender operational authority over Vancouver, Montreal, Halifax, and Prince Rupert. The reason, according to the president, was simple. Canadian ports are vital to American commerce, he argued, and it is time they were run according to American rules with American priorities, serving American interest before anyone else's. The response from Ottawa did not come in the form of a diplomatic note or a request for talks. Within 2 days, Prime Minister Mark Carney stood in the House of Commons and effectively rewrote the rules of continental trade. He announced that Canadian port capacity would be immediately reallocated away from American shipping lines. He signed emergency preferential access deals with the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and India. And then he dropped a $12 billion plan to expand Arctic port infrastructure, a plan that explicitly bars American commercial participation. Warren Buffett, watching from Omaha, reportedly told associates it was the single most expensive miscalculation in negotiation he had seen in 70 years. Then he articulated a rule that seems to have been lost in the West Wing. You never, he said, make a public demand that advertises your own dependency. But it was not Buffett's analysis that went viral. It was Carney's closing remark. 7 words delivered directly into the camera that is now being cited in boardrooms from Tokyo to Berlin. To understand why this moment matters, you need to hear exactly what Trump demanded. Why Carney's refusal was actually a trap that flipped the leverage dynamic entirely, and what now happens to every American product that crosses Canadian waters. The supply chain consequences are already arriving, and they are not slowing down. The demand came without provocation. The president looked into the camera and said that Canada possesses some of the most strategically important ports in North America, and yet they are not being operated in a way that benefits the United States. He complained that billions of dollars in American goods transit those facilities without any U.S. oversight. No priority access, no meaningful say in how they are run. That he declared is about to change. He demanded that the United States be granted operational oversight of key Canadian ports including Vancouver, Montreal, Halifax, and Prince Rupert. He insisted that American commercial vessels receive priority access and priority processing at all of them. The language was extraordinary. He spoke as if Canadian ports existed primarily to serve American commerce, as if their purpose was to prioritize a foreign nation's logistics. Behind closed doors, the pressure was even more detailed. The U.S. Trade Representative delivered a 37-page memorandum to the Canadian ambassador outlining American inspection authority at Canadian terminals, American veto power over port scheduling, American priority queuing for commercial ships, and a requirement that Canadian port authorities submit operational plans to a joint committee with an American-appointed chair. One Canadian trade official who reviewed the document told colleagues that it read less like a trade proposal and more like a colonial administration manual. This, he said, is the governance structure of a territory, not a partnership between sovereign nations. The White House also signaled through intermediaries that the demand was non-negotiable. Failure to comply, they warned, would trigger a complete restructuring of the bilateral relationship, a phrase that trade analysts immediately understood as a threat of comprehensive sanctions. Carney responded, and his response was not simply a refusal. It was a trap, and the White House walked into it with both eyes open, apparently not seeing the danger until it was too late. Standing in the Canadian House of Commons with every member of Parliament present, the diplomatic gallery packed with ambassadors from more than 30 nations, Carney let the silence build. He spoke first to Canadians. He reminded them that the President of the United States had stood at a podium and demanded control of their ports. Not American ports, their ports. The ports built by their grandparents, maintained by their tax dollars, operated every day by their workers, sitting on their land, in their waters, under their flag. He noted that the demand had been made the way someone demands something they believe they are entitled to. But entitlement, he said, is not ownership. Then he unveiled 3 countermeasures that together amounted to a fundamental restructuring of leverage. First, immediate implementation of a Canadian Port Sovereignty Protocol, formally prohibiting any foreign government from exercising oversight, inspection authority, or scheduling influence over Canadian port operations. This was enshrined in emergency legislation to be voted on within the week. Second, the signing of preferential port access agreements with the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and India, granting those nations priority processing. The effect was to move American shipping from the front of the line to the back. Third, a $12 billion accelerated investment in Arctic deep-water port infrastructure at Churchill and NASA, designed explicitly to serve the emerging northern shipping routes between Europe and Asia, routes that bypass American ports entirely with no American participation, no American oversight, and no American access without Canadian permission. The announcements landed like sequential detonations. Preferential agreements meant European and Asian cargo would move through Canadian ports faster than American cargo, a direct inversion of the priority access Trump had demanded. The Arctic investment meant Canada was building the infrastructure of the future while locking the United States out of it. The Sovereignty Protocol meant the legal door Trump had tried to force open was not just closed, but welded shut permanently. Carney had not simply said no. He had restructured the board so the question could never be asked again. Then came the 7 words. Carney turned to the camera, paused, and spoke directly to the president with the precision of someone delivering a verdict, not an argument. He said that he understood the size of the American economy might have led the president to believe that size determines leverage, but he wanted to explain something about ports, infrastructure, and geography that the White House advisors apparently had failed to mention. You did not demand our ports, he said, because you are strong. You demanded them because you need them. And the fact that you stood at a podium in front of the entire world and announced that American commerce depends on Canadian infrastructure has told every nation on earth something that we have known quietly for a very long time, but that you have just confirmed publicly and irreversibly. He paused. The chamber was absolutely silent. Every diplomat in the gallery leaned forward. And then Carney said 7 words that are now on the front page of every major newspaper in the trading world. You don't demand what you depend on. Another pause. And you certainly don't do it on camera. The standing ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes. Every MP, government and opposition, left and right, every province, every party. The phrase was trending globally within 6 minutes. But Carney's refusal, as politically devastating as it was, only scratched the surface. What it exposed is something most Americans have never been told about their own country's trade infrastructure. The United States depends on Canadian ports to a degree that would shock most citizens. It is a structural vulnerability that the White House just advertised to the entire world. The Port of Vancouver alone handles roughly 20% of all goods moving between Asia and the North American interior. It is the closest major deepwater Pacific port to Asian manufacturing centers, with shipping routes 2 to 3 days shorter than routes to Los Angeles or Long Beach. For American importers in the Midwest, the factories in Michigan, the distribution centers in Illinois, the agricultural exporters in Minnesota and Wisconsin, goods routed through Vancouver and then south by rail reach their destinations faster and cheaper than goods routed through congested American West Coast ports, where container ships regularly wait 7 to 14 days for berth space. The Port of Montreal and the St. Lawrence Seaway are the primary artery connecting European trade to the Great Lakes industrial heartland, a corridor that carries over $40 billion in goods annually and has no American equivalent. The port of Halifax serves as the first North American landfall for transatlantic shipping, with a natural harbor deep enough to accommodate the largest container vessels in the world. And the emerging Arctic deep water ports, Churchill on Hudson Bay and Nunavik on Baffin Island, sit directly on the northern shipping routes that climate change is opening between Europe and Asia, routes that will reshape global trade within a decade and that Canada, by